Have you ever wanted to achieve two things at the same time? The concept of one exercise having carryover to other exercises might be a trap that you might have experienced or will experience. Carryover is the process of one exercise benefiting a different exercise. In this case, doing one exercise will make you better at two different ranges of motion. Now, the question is, to what extent and is it worth it for your goals? Carryover is a real process. Basically, any exercise that develops a particular muscle's general strength will have carryover. All exercises can be expected to have carryover to some extent. Otherwise, how could we function or survive? For example, if you have well-developed delts, we can expect you to perform better at any shoulder flexion range of motion than if you didn't have well-developed delts. Regardless of what range of motion you use to build your delts, the muscle mass means a greater general strength floor. However, if we know that carryover is the result of an exercise giving you general strength, meaning that an exercise gives you strength at different ranges of motion rather than just one particular range of motion, can you expect a lot of carryover once you get most of your general strength? Calisthenics is a good example because we are forced to train with a fixed load. What I mean with fixed load is that most exercises don't change in load. Because we use our own body weight, they remain with a fixed weight or difficulty, as opposed to weights where you can simply change the amount of weight you use, thus making it easier or harder to your liking. This makes complete beginners need to start with the easier exercises first. From the standpoint of a sedentary beginner, it is very likely that he will not be able to do dips if he can only do 3 push-ups. The dip has no extra support, therefore it uses more of our own body weight. Since the load is fixed, we cannot decrease it unless we use an external method like bands. The approach that a calisthenic beginner will have to take to achieve his first dip will be to first get stronger at pull-ups to build basic general pushing strength, along with conditioning his joints and muscles. Since we use push-ups to build general strength, we are assuming that push-ups have a significant carryover to dips. How do we know that this is true? Because of experience. Enough people have gone through that experience and can confirm that it is true. Despite the fact that they are at a different shoulder flexion range of motion, they are similar enough to see significant carryover, at least in the beginning. They both use the chest, shoulders, and triceps. They both involve the bending of the arm. When a beginner learns to do his first dip from only doing a push-up, something important happens. He is rewarded on one exercise despite not having done it at all. With this experience, then the beginner can transfer this conclusion to other exercises as well. If I could achieve my first dip without training the dip itself, why couldn't I achieve a harder exercise in this same way? And it is true. You're probably also capable of achieving your first bike push-up doing only dips or push-ups. The problem comes when it stops happening. You could see carryover to dips or bike push-ups from only doing conventional push-ups because they are not only similar, but a big factor not taken into account is the difficulty of the exercise, along with the inherent difficulty of the goal itself. We know a bodyweight dip is not hard to achieve. Objectively, it's not really hard, although it also depends on your own body weight. A pike push-up, despite not using the chest muscles as much as the dip and the push-up, is not that hard, because you are not using all of your own body weight. Once you have achieved a good amount of dips and pike push-ups, you have successfully achieved your beginner general strength, which is greatly influenced by your newbie gains. Because your muscles went from sedentary to a more active state, you experience a lot of carryover and got a false expectation. You will set new goals, and because of the difficulty of these new goals, you are probably not going to reach them as fast or with only carryover, or with the same sets or programming as you did with the easier goals. You will realize the great carryover that you experienced was only a dream, and that you need to actually work specifically for these harder exercises if you want to remotely be good at them. If you want to reach your first handstand push-up and see noticeable progress or difference, you can expect to see as much carryover from other exercises as you saw when you achieved your first dip or pike push-up. The stronger you become, the harder your goals become, and the harder your goals become, the more you will need to work for them. Or if you want to see carryover, you will need to become exceptional at the exercise you are doing to expect carryover from. For example, becoming really good at weighted dips to see noticeable carryover in handstand push-ups. In my experience, for example, despite being capable of doing 12 to 14 handstand push-ups unbroken in a good day, I see little to no carryover in pseudo planche push-ups. And it makes sense. Their shoulder flexion ranges of motion are somewhat far away from each other. If I keep doing handstand push-ups expecting a lot of carryover to pseudo planche push-ups, then this false expectation will just disappoint me. When you see beginner programs for general strength, the sets tend to be equal per body part, and there is nothing wrong with it. However, if your goal is something like the handstand push-up, for example, you will not be able to become good at it with only 4 sets per session. And this is more true the harder the goal is. You might have been able to achieve the dip and the pike push-up and increase your reps with only 4 sets, but this will no longer be the case with harder exercises. I think the biggest contrast can be seen in athletic training against beginner or bodybuilding programs. The athlete in his specific sport will do a bunch of sets that only target what he does in his sports specifically, trying to totally increase his movement efficiency, whereas the bodybuilder will try to divide his sets equally, assuming that he is not currently focusing on one muscle. The beginner at anything needs to train to some extent like a bodybuilder to condition most of his joints and prevent injury. Also, the beginner is weak, so he can benefit from this conditioning. Ultimately, once you stop being a beginner, you will notice that you no longer will have the same degree of carryover that you had in the beginning as your goals become harder. As your goals become harder, you will need to put more attention and energy to those specific goals. This basically means that you need to do a greater total amount of sets, reps, and frequency than you used to do, adjusting intensity to be able to do that amount of volume. In other words, train and focus on the thing you want to get good at. This also applies to growing muscles to some extent. Expecting to have good-looking visible abs without ever training them is something most people will not experience. This might sound like common sense, but sometimes when you are a beginner, you want everything at once. And when you get the taste of the carryover you can experience as a beginner, you sort of believe that you can achieve things without putting too much attention and energy towards those goals, or the sacrifices or trade-offs needed to train a heavier or harder exercise.